Ok, bonjour à tous, bienvenue à la session d'insectes de colloque de CEF 2021. Les insectes sont indispensables en les écosystèmes, fait des fonctions super importantes comme la pollinisation, la décomposition du bois, mais aussi parfois pourrait devenir une perturbation naturelle biotique super importante et faire des dommages très importants en la forêt. Aujourd'hui, nous avons en total de 4 conférenciers qui vont nous parler sur des différents sujets et problématiques en lien avec les insectes. La dynamique qu'on va voir en cette session, ce sera que chaque conférencier va présenter par la suite, à la fin, on aura une période de questions une fois que tout le monde va finir de présenter et ça sera la dynamique. Pour pas, on va déjà commencer directement pour notre première conférence d'aujourd'hui, que c'est l'étudiant Lauren Egli, un étudiant de doctorat à l'UQAM sur la direction de Teamwork et Benoît Lafleur, et va nous parler sur les facteurs influençant la régénération végétale dans les champs forestiers démantelés, les implications pour la conservation du caribou boréal. Bienvenue, Lauren, tu as la parole.
So my name is Lauren Egli. I'm a PhD student in TimWorks lab at UQAM, and I'm going to present some of my work, which I started as part of my master's project before I transferred into the PhD program. So today my presentation will be on evaluating the recovery of ground beetle communities over 20 years after clear cutting and partial cutting in Quebec's boreal forests. So a quick look at what I'm going to cover in this presentation. I'll begin with the context of my study, highlight my objectives, look through my methodology, some of my results, and then finally we'll discuss what we can conclude. So start with some quick context to frame out the study. As most of us know, historically, managed boreal forests have been harvested primarily through clear cutting. When stands are clear cuts, any successional stage typically reinitiates as hardwood dominated stands. This can be an issue because it creates even-age stands with a homogeneous composition and structure, which can also remove habitat elements and resources such as old growth trees, coarse woody debris, closed canopy, which are necessary for certain species. Thus, we expect some loss of biodiversity following clear cutting. So over the past several decades, many forest management operations have therefore started to integrate natural disturbance-based silviculture in the hopes that it'll better preserve resident biodiversity and be more sustainable. So in natural disturbance-based silviculture, you can still clear cut. There's also an expanded list of management options which better reflect the variety of disturbance intensities which are found in unmanaged stands. So for example, partial cutting could be used to emulate competition in some ways by thinning young trees to increase growth of the remaining individuals, or emulate senescence by harvesting marketable stems. This can move a stand from hardwood dominated to mixedwood, or vice versa, depending on the species of trees you harvest. Additionally, you could conduct single tree selection or group selection in mixedwood stands to move them towards softwood composition. And then finally, you can do these cuts in softwood stands to keep them softwoods, although it requires cutting pretty small gaps or making sure you have plenty of softwood regeneration in the understory. Otherwise, you end up creating a favorable environment for those shade-intolerant hardwoods. And the use of partial cutting strategies can increase stand heterogeneity, leaves a greater variety of trees of different ages, so different stem diameters, and also increases the diversity of the tree species present as a whole. This change can help recreate or maintain essential habitat elements, such as more down dead wood, available due to natural senescence of those remaining trees, or provide more diverse microhabitats, so things like greater ranges of light and humidity reaching the forest floor. So that may overall better preserve resident biodiversity as compared to clear cutting. So my goal for this study was to determine how long it takes for resident ground beetle biodiversity to recover following clear cutting and an increasing intensity of partial cutting. I selected ground beetles to use in this study as an indicator of forest change, as they're a diverse taxa whose species composition responds rapidly to changes in forest structure and composition, more so than plants and vertebrate species. And they're also very highly sensitive to stand level disturbances. Methodology. My study site is in the Lake du Parquet Research and Teaching Forest. It's located in the boreal mixedwood forest, and it's part of the CEF project. Some of you may know that. The CEF project was initiated in 1998, includes harvests which took place in hardwood, mixedwood, and softwood dominated stands. The hardwood stands were harvested in a 1/3 cut, which targeted small stems, and a 2/3 cut, which was a single tree selection of large marketable stems. Stands were also clear cut, with the residues further treated through prescribed burning, removed as part of whole tree harvest, or left as part of CPRS clear cutting. And then additionally, uncut stands were left as controls. The mixed wood stands were harvested through clear cutting, again CPRS, and then through partial cutting, either a single tree selection where 40% of the basal area was removed, or group selections, also 40% of the basal area, but this time in 400-meter square islands. Again, controls. And then finally, the softwood stands were simply CPRS, clear cut, or left as controls. We collected ground beetles through pitfall trapping, which occurred over 7 sampling seasons between 2004 and 2018. Between 2004 and 2016, we caught and identified over 37,000 carabids from 61 species. And then in 2018, we collected and identified over 33,000 individuals from 43 species. So we almost doubled our catch for the whole project in 2018 alone. So on to my results. So this is ground beetle community response, shown as a sum of squares multivariate regression tree. So for this specific MRT, we're looking at the interactions between time since harvest, harvest treatment, and cover type on ground beetle community composition. So MRT organizes the stem based on the similarity of those ground beetle communities found within each treatment. So if it regroups an uncut control stand with one of those harvested treatments, we know that that community composition is similar between both stands. So we can consider that treatment recovered, at least in terms of community composition. So I'd like to talk about the results of this MRT in 3 segments. We'll break it down. That far left branch is the earliest data, so that is 3 to 10 years post-harvest. This middle branch is approximately 15 years post-harvest, and then this far right branch is the earliest or the latest. This is 20 years post-harvest. So we'll start with the earliest data. Here we can see that immediately after harvest, ground beetle community composition changed in the clear cuts and the softwoods and hardwood stands. So we had an immediate separation of those from the controls. However, in that same time frame, both of the partial cuts in the hardwood stands, so that was the 1/3 cut targeting small stems and the 2/3 cut targeting marketable stems, those both maintained their beetle communities similar to the uncut control. So that was really great because in this case, we found that a removal of up to 2/3 of that basal area in the hardwood stands was enough to maintain biodiversity, and we still kept it there. Unfortunately, the story was not the same in the mixedwood stands. In these stands, ground beetle communities in the partial cuts, so that was both the single tree selection and the group selection where 40% of the basal area was removed, those were more similar to what was found in the clear cuts. So therefore, partial cutting in those mixedwood stands didn't have that same early retention of biodiversity as we did in the partial cuts in the hardwood stands. Moving to the center of the tree, as of 15 years post-harvest, the 1/3 harvest of small stems, the 2/3 harvest of marketable stems, and the clear cuts in the hardwood stands had all recovered, so 15 years later, as well as the clear cuts in the softwood stands. So all of those were now similar to their control. However, as of 20 years post-harvest, those partial cuts and the clear cuts in the mixedwood stands were still more similar to each other and had not regrouped with that control. So we have not seen recovery of those stands as of 20 years after harvest. And then additionally, if we look back at those prescribed burns and the whole tree harvest, we had immediate negative effects on ground beetle community composition right after harvest, and it didn't improve over 20 years. So we have not seen recovery there either. So while that MRT looked at trends in the community level data, this next model looks at trends in the top 8 most abundant species. So in this model, we compared the interactions between increasing basal area, which is found to be a major response variable for carabids, with the abundance of each of those 8 cores, so the most frequently found species, to see how abundance changes as a function of tree growth as well as time. So we found that in 7 out of 8 of the species, we had higher abundance when less basal area was removed. So in this example, which is Pterosticus pennsylvanicus, you can tell that by the positive slope of the lines. So higher abundance of basal area, higher abundance of those carabids, so greater retentions of trees. For all 8 species, we had a steady increase in abundance at all treatments over every sampling year. We can see this in this graph because each line jumps up within each year. This is somewhat of a mystery for us. A lot of the world is seeing major declines in insect abundance. So it's really interesting that at this site, we're seeing the opposite. We're seeing major increases of almost everybody every year. We think that it's possible that that's a climactic signal at our site with the increasing overall temperatures causing increase in beetle activity or fecundity. And then finally, in only 3 out of 8 of the species have we seen recovery in abundance over time. So we can tell from the lines of this as they slowly straighten out that we have the same abundance in those old clear cuts as the controls. So therefore, while we've had decent recovery in ground beetle community composition, we're still waiting for that full recovery in abundance for a lot of the species. So some overall conclusions we can draw from that is that while intensive management options, which removed logging residues, really slowed the recovery of biodiversity, several of those natural disturbance-based silvicultural strategies were able to more effectively conserve biodiversity as compared to conventional clear cutting. So in particular, harvesting earlier successional hardwood stands and retaining larger quantities of green trees both seem to really speed up recovery. And then I'd like to offer a big thanks to NSERC for providing the funding and all of those who came before me to set up the project and identify all of those early carabids. And then questions at the end of the block, but if anyone has anything else they'd like to talk about, here's my email. I always like to chat entomology. And thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you, Lorraine, for this great presentation.